Greetings, everyone. I'm Larry Williams, the Director of the Center for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis, or CARMA, at Wayne State University. And it is April 11th, 2014, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the last segment of Meet the Methodologist, the interview program that we run in conjunction with our consortium webcast program. And we're here today with two people who have been each involved with CARMA as faculty and students for over 10 years, and they're here to deliver the two webcasts this afternoon. And so I'm going to take the opportunity to chat with our guests about some research issues, some professional issues, and let me point out you're most likely watching this on our CARMA YouTube channel, and I'd just like to make sure that you know that we have things other than Meet the Methodologist on our YouTube channel. We have some short course briefs, video clips from short courses in the past. For nearly all of our short courses, we have video previews by the instructors, and so there are several things that you might find of interest on there. We do have over 125 subscribers, and we've had over 13,000 views of our recordings on our CARMA YouTube channel. So we appreciate the support. Check it out and spread the word. But today we're here to talk first of all with Ernest O'Boyle from the University of Iowa and Rob Poyhart from the University of South Carolina. And it's a real pleasure. So gentlemen, I usually just kind of start out with, well, how did you get interested in research methods? And we'll kind of like ask different questions, and we'll take Ernest to go first on this one.
Larry Williams was my advisor, so I got interested in research methods. Actually, I always had a strong interest in the methodology, what makes experimental design, because I started out as a psychologist, and although the content classes were of a strong interest to me, it was always the methodology to understand how the research process works. And that's really where I got hooked, was about, I guess I was a junior as an undergrad, and I started to get more and more interested in statistics courses. And then when I left the social psychology program to move over to the business program, once I had both Larry Williams in structural equation modeling and Mike McDaniel in meta-analysis, it really was a dream come true to be working with two giants in the field. So that was where my interest came from. There we go.
For some, that dream may have been nightmares, but that's okay.
Yeah, very similar type of situation, and really it was in graduate school trying to understand, answer questions that you were interested in. I was interested in organizational phenomena and trying to make sense of those. Why do certain things happen the way they do? Why do certain people do the things that they do in organizations? And you couldn't answer them without methodology. Right? If you're going to do an empirical study, that's part of the package. And you realize very quickly that you can ask better questions, you can answer those questions more effectively the more familiar you are with the methodology. And then I came to realize that I could ask better questions if I knew methodology. I know that most people like to think of it that theory drives methods, but I think methods have the opportunity to drive theory just as much, and they should form a symbiotic relationship. And if you don't have the methodology piece of it, you're limited in my mind. And so that's what got me interested in it. And then once I started learning methodology, really appreciating how much of the world it opened up. So it's been good.
Well, you both have made some interesting but different types of transitions. So, Rob, you started out in psychology departments at two universities and then made the switch, I think you said 10 years ago, to the management school at the University of South Carolina. And so what was that transition like for you? What were the hard parts and what were the easy parts?
For the most part, it was pretty natural because I've always kind of been straddling psychology and business, even as an undergraduate. And it really comes down to, if you're that kind of person, which department best fits your interests. The department I'm in now is very eclectic in that we have folks trained more in economics, we have more mainstream HR people, OB people, and then another IO psychologist. So to me, that was a very natural fit. But it really came down to which area, psychology or business, was most aligned with your interests. And I still have great interest in psychology, but at least currently, most of my interests fall more onto the business side of things. So that was, you know, that's just an issue of fit, right? But the biggest, I'd say, surprise on the front end was how much psychology has implications for business, and then at the exact same time, how little any of us really appreciate what those implications might be. I mean, as an IO psychologist, I thought I knew a lot about organizations, and I was really wrong about that. And in my interactions with folks from industry, what they're looking for a lot of times is what applied psychologists or management scholars would offer, but they don't think of it that way. And so it's really this weird discrepancy that exists, and if we could just find ways of communicating more effectively, I think it would be better for everyone.
Okay, and Ernest, you made the transition from an initial gig at more of a teaching-oriented school now to the University of Iowa, high-profile research university. What were some of the positives and negatives of that transition?
It was so many positives, and that's not to malign my former institution whatsoever. It was a very good institution, but it's exactly what Rob is talking about. It was fit. And I really wanted the bulk of my time to be in the research domain, although I do care a great deal about teaching. The transition over to University of Iowa, what it allowed me to do was explore things that I just didn't have the resources to explore at my former institution. So that's really what, that's the biggest positive or the biggest change that I see, that in working with colleagues that are very excited about research. And I can't, you know, being at a place like Wayne State where a group of doctoral students all here on a Friday morning, you're able to bounce ideas off each other, and that was something that was missing for the most part at my former institution. Now that I'm at Iowa, I can bounce ideas off colleagues, and they have similar interests. So in terms of positives, that's the biggest positive I have. In terms of the negative, really not much. Most of the pressure that I put on, or that is put on me by myself. So I don't feel my colleagues, I don't have a competitive, you know, anybody who gets a pub, well, that's one against me or anything like that. It's not that experience, but so hard for me to think of a single negative.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the teaching, and you know, we have people in here for the most part with a focus on their research, but I know that you both are very good teachers. What is it you think that you bring into the classroom, or how you approach what goes on in the classroom, that makes you good teachers? And it may vary by level. You want to go first?
Sure. Well, you know, I think it's okay to like teaching and still be a researcher. I mean, I think, you know, sometimes you have the impression that we feel we have to be one or the other, or we have to choose one or the other. And I think that if you really are engaged in you know, your research, you should be equally engaged in being able to teach on that subject. And so what I try to do, and I actually do like going in and teaching, I'll use the class as an opportunity to bounce research projects off of, and I don't expect them to know all the methodology. I'm not going to drag them through that. But if I can't find something that compels them in what I'm researching, it makes you wonder how much what you're doing really makes that big of a difference in the real world, and might you look at it a little bit differently and have a bigger impact. At the same time, as I'm describing that to the class, they're bringing up ideas that maybe I would have never thought of. They're coming at it from a completely different perspective, and responding to those questions often sharpens your thinking on a particular subject. So back to that point about transition. When I transitioned from a psych program to a business program, the students tended to ask different kinds of questions. And I felt in IO psychology that I really had a pretty good sense as to what was going on in business. And I'd say I was pretty much off on that. Not wrong, but definitely very naive and simplistic in the way that I was thinking about it. I learned a lot from those early classes in terms of how the folks in business are thinking about issues, and I feel that has improved and made my research that much more interesting. So I really don't see them as different. I bring consulting projects into the class and talk about them there. Things that come up in class discussion sometimes wind their way back out in the form of research projects. So really, they should be, you know, give and take, back and forth, and building on each other.
Ernest?
But once again, agree with most of what you're saying. it never made sense to me, the idea you could get so excited about discovery, which is the research side of things, but then not like the dissemination of information. That never made sense to me. So I always saw it as something that fed off the other. So I do get research ideas from the classes, and that's undergraduate, MBA, or PhD seminars. I get ideas from that, and then it's also great when I can bounce ideas off of them and start to understand some of the group dynamics, understand the things that we're supposed to do. But as an applied field, we don't have the luxury of just doing science behind closed doors, doing it for our own purposes. We're applied. We have to get that information out. And for most of us, the chief way that we disseminate information is in a classroom setting. So not looking at it as a dividing the pie, oh, geez, I got to go teach for 2 hours, this is breaking up my research flow, but really looking at it as an expanding the pie situation, that it is symbiotic, one informs the other.
Well, and you know, just one other thought on that, you know, for most people, doesn't matter who they are, if you ask them to talk about something they're interested in, they're going to talk about it forever, right? I mean, it's people like to share with other people things that they're interested in. So why not take that perspective when teaching a class? Make the class be something that you're interested in to the extent allowed within the constraints of the class, and then use it as an opportunity to talk about things that excite you, because if they're exciting to you, odds are going to be good. You'll be able to spread that enthusiasm to the students, and maybe somebody in there will actually be interested in work that you're doing or work in the profession. You don't know that that's somebody that's going to be encouraged by that and maybe go pursue a degree, you know, advanced degree of their own. So, you know, try to find a way to spread your enthusiasm, I guess is what I'd say.
Kind of as a follow-up to this notion of teaching, I think one kind of illusion that people have when they're students is that they're going to learn things and that they're not going to have to continue learning after they get out. And so, in my own experience as a faculty member, I, from the beginning, always going back to books, you know, even books that I may have had in the courses that I took. And so I'm just wondering, do you guys have any favorite books that you rely on a lot or more than others?
The Klein 2004, I guess it's been revised now, 2010, but that SEM text is in such plain language, and then the other one I find myself going to fairly often more on philosophical grounds is the Abelson Statistics as Principled Argument. Just great, great text to really lay out what we're trying to do, that we're not number crunching, it's an argument. It's something where we're trying to persuade through numbers. So I really enjoy those pieces, and I find myself going back more and more, just reading them one more time.
Yeah, I think to that point, there are certain books that just capture your attention, and every time you read it, you get something new back out of it. And so one of those, and it's been revised, I guess 2003 might have been the last time, but Cohen's original Multiple Regression and Correlation. It was not an easy read as a doctoral student, but to this day, and even with the revision, I still pick something out of it every time when I teach the class that requires that book. I still read the chapters in it because every time I learn something new out of it. Now there's so many good methods books that have come out in the last 10 years. I mean, there were before, but I think the field's exploded. I mean, there's a lot of really good reading in specialized areas that it's hard to pick just one thing. But I'd say that as you're learning methodology, there will be a couple books that just, for whatever way, speak to you in the right way, they're presented in the right way. You know, don't forget them. You're going to go back to them over and over, and that really frames the way you think about it. To give you an example, Nunnally and Bernstein. You know, that book was one that I had in graduate school, and I still think about measurement from the way that Nunnally talks about it. Anastasi's earlier edition. I mean, those frame, I mean, in a review today, I will refer to things in the way that they've discussed them. So they really do have that kind of foundational effect on your thinking.
And just to piggyback on that, I think many times something becomes such a classic that we don't read it anymore. And Nunnally is one of those that has become such a classic we don't read it anymore. So we start to rely on things that have really been warped from it. So the .70 reliability criteria, that's not at all what's being said in that text. And the idea that you can use something with a reliability of .7 in a selection context, outright, absolutely not. That's never going to work. It's got to be .9 or .95 is what it says. But when you go back and read those texts, it's amazing how much more you get out of it.
Yeah.
All right, so, well, from teaching into research and a little bit more into research, you both, as methods people, have worked in multiple methods areas, but I'm just going to ask you to comment, each of you to comment on one of them. And it's kind of a big picture question, and Ernest, I'll ask this of you related to meta-analysis, and Rob, you for levels of analysis. And the big picture kind of perspective or question is, if you look at the survey of what the methods people are studying regarding these two methodological approaches, do you think are there things that we are missing that we should devote more attention to, things that we don't understand, that we should better understand?
Yes, certainly. And meta-analysis, some of the things that concern me, and this is going to be in an IOP commentary, if it's already out, it's waiting for commentaries in reply to it, but the idea of corrections, psychometric corrections in meta-analysis, I don't think we fully understand everything that goes into it. In addition to that, the complexity of meta-analyses is moving faster than we are about making sure that we're meeting assumptions, in particular things like meta-SEM. And how do we violate all these assumptions that SEM puts forth, but then we're able to somehow justify it because we have a large K or a large sample size. So I think we've just taken a step back. I understand that finding bivariate relations, it's going to be between 0.2 and 0.3. But once you actually get beyond that, slowing down and let's look at one moderator at a time. Let's see what the effect is of, for example, correcting for reliability in the criterion of these very low values. This is something that was first brought up by Larry James in 2007 in a CARMA webcast, something I assigned to all my students. So I think that, as I said, the complexity of meta-analysis is moving faster than we are verifying that we're meeting those assumptions in these advanced techniques.
Yeah. How about related to level stuff?
Yeah, actually a similar point in that I think the basic multi-level models are well established now within the management and social sciences. Yet we stay pretty close to those basic models. We don't vary them out a whole lot. And when you use those models in the real world, a lot of things break down. Assumptions, violation of assumptions, and I don't think we have a very good understanding of the consequences of that. When we have, say, nesting or clustering that might exist at 3 or more levels, it's sometimes difficult to figure out how you model that. There's a lot of real difficult challenges with applying those models with real-world data. And that's where those models are most needed, in my mind anyway. And so just the practical realities of working with them, and there are some papers that are starting to come out that speak to these things, but I think there's still a lot more that we can learn there. And then to take that basic model and expand it out further. Understanding better the nature of cross-level effects, or in longitudinal modeling, some of the consequences of having, say, change occurring at one level and change occurring at another level, and how change across levels plays out. So I think the field is evolving that way, but I don't think it's there yet.
Okay. So as I mentioned at the beginning, you are here to do webcast, and so could you kind of give a 2 or 3 minute overview of each of your webcasts?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's close to what I was just describing with respect to multi-level. The webcast is going to focus primarily on talking about the basic growth model, longitudinal growth model, and it's one that's been around for at least since the mid-'80s, and actually prior to that by quite a bit. And why we're still focused on this very basic model when it doesn't necessarily reflect a lot of what happens in the real world. So I'm going to talk about different ways of thinking about change, and actually pushing the field a bit to think about change in a more practically focused manner. And I'm going to describe how when we think about change with using box and arrow models, an independent variable, an arrow, and a dependent variable, it really obscures a lot of the action that's happening with longitudinal phenomena. And if we think about them differently, what it starts to do is it changes the kind of questions we might ask about longitudinal research. And in doing that, it leads us to use different extensions of the basic growth model. Those extensions are already there, there are applications of them, but I don't think the field is really embracing them yet. And I'm going to just describe that from a variety of different perspectives. But to sum it up, the methodology offers incredible ways of modeling longitudinal data that we don't think about. So embrace the methodology and it will set you free. That's the argument.
Hey.
He's got a closer, I don't have one. The papers I'm going to talk about today deal with this topic of outcome reporting bias. And that we have, at least there's a perception that the more supported hypotheses you have in a manuscript, the more statistically significant findings, the more likely it's going to be published independent of rigor and relevance. What that does is it creates a problem where if you're a researcher engaged in best practices and you don't get statistically significant results, or only a small number of them, you may feel inclined to make changes to a manuscript to put the best face possible on it and then ship that out. And the consequence of that, the consequence of those questionable research practices is outcome reporting bias. Most people think of publication bias in the sense of entire studies being suppressed, but it could just be small findings. But those small changes that happen over and over, and if they happen at high enough frequency, they have the ability to really skew our literature and give us this false sense of predictive accuracy. My major concern with outcome reporting bias right now, more so than publication bias, is that it's much harder to detect. See, we kind of have some tricks and techniques to figure out this distribution of effect sizes seems like it might be some publication bias there. But if I put two papers in front of you, one supported with best practices and one supported with questionable practices, you probably couldn't tell the difference between the two. So I think that we have this problem that's being driven by this motivation, lots and lots of supported hypotheses, and I think we need to address the motivation before we really start talking about kind of the means and opportunity to engage in these negative behaviors. So that's the reason why the talk is called The Gilded Age. It's dealing with this idea we look a lot better than we may actually be in terms of our predictive accuracy.
Okay. Last question just concerns the advice and the wisdom that you've derived from your years of experience. And I know you must get asked this a lot from doctoral students at your own school as well as junior colleagues that you interact with. And, you know, what do you think it takes to succeed in this profession? What should students do more of or less of if they really want to advance their particular position in the profession?
More karma. I think sometimes making it, especially if someone's going from undergraduate directly into a doctoral program, there might be a belief that I'm here to learn. And after I learn, then I'm going to start applying the information and start to research and publish. And I don't think that that's the best way to do it. It's the most I ever got out of the CARMA short courses, and I've attended about a dozen of them, was when I was able to take those ideas and immediately implement them into a research project. That's really where you learn it. You know, I believe that you don't fully understand something until you publish on it, or at least you don't partially even understand something until you publish on it a couple times. So in terms, just get involved with research projects. Don't go it alone. A lot of friendly reviews, talk research out, whether it's over coffee or over a beer. Those are some times where you get some fantastic ideas. So just work hard, publish a lot.
Well, yeah, really the same advice, and I don't think there's any secret formula to it, but I guess what I would say is, you know, stay curious and be willing to allow yourself to be curious, because it's curiosity that probably compelled you to go to graduate school in the first place. And there are lots of things that pull and demand your time in graduate school that can sometimes diminish that curiosity. And you have to remember every day waking back up why you're doing this, and somehow find a way to make sure that in the course of the day you get to spend some time on those things you're curious about. It's like climbing Mount Everest, going through graduate school to a certain extent. You know, you'd think that when you reach the summit, you're done. You know, victory. You've made it to the top, and that's sort of like how graduate school feels. You get through graduate school, you defend your dissertation, and you're at the summit. But it turns out as many people, or close to as many people, die coming back down the mountain as they do going up, because there's still not enough oxygen on the downward side as there was on the way up. And graduate school is similar. If you think that's it, then you're going to have a rough road ahead of you, you know, if you go academic at least, getting tenure and being engaged. So I think the safest piece of advice for you is just remember what you're curious about and keep doing that. And that's probably going to change over time. And so allow that to change over time. I mean, the stuff that I research today is pretty far removed from what I was interested in graduate school. It's related, but it's quite a bit different. And I tell you what, though, I'm really interested in it, and it makes it easy to get up every day and want to, you know, get to work on it. So I think that's the key. All the things that Ernest said are clearly important, and I agree with that. But you know, curiosity is just, it's easy to forget it.
All right. Well, it's been a great year for our webcast program, and it's a real honor to have you here to bring it to a close, and we thank you for sharing your thoughts on these matters with us.
Thank you for